Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Joseph Mogel. I'm a semi-pro author, been writing for a number of years. I have a number of short stories in publication at the moment, and I've decided that I'm going to do a series of videos on YouTube to discuss the different techniques and methodologies involved in getting published professionally, or in a semi-pro case, as the case may be with me. So the first thing I'd like to talk about are some resources for writing. Now, when most people think about resources, you probably think the library for starters, but there are a number of other places you can turn to, and some of them through the library, some of them through the internet. One of the first things most people have at their disposal, and this is something that a lot of writing professors will tell you, are writing magazines. So you have magazines such as Poets and Writers and The Writer, and what these magazines have is, in addition to articles on writing, on different styles of writing, different approaches taken by different authors, professional, semi-pro, etc. They also have lists of open submissions. So these are magazines, these are anthologies, these are publishing houses that are open for publications in various forms. So let's say you have a novel, you have a novella, you have a short story. They will have, well organized in the back section of the magazine, a list of places you can turn to. They'll usually have either an address, a phone number, or an email address. And in addition to an email address, they also have a website, obviously. They also have information on writers' retreats and other writing seminars, sessions, etc. A writer's retreat, by the way, is kind of like a vacation in a sense. If you're a semi-pro or pro, you might be able to get it comped. If not, there's a price you have to pay for it. But basically the point is to go to some out-of-the-way location, nice relaxing place to work on your writing, usually with a whole bunch of other writers. But magazines are kind of they're going out of style on a certain level. What's really popular is the internet, obviously. And most people who are into writing, you've probably looked up places to submit your stories. If you've written in a certain genre, a certain take, you might search, let's say, horror publishing houses. If you're writing horror, I write a decent amount of horror. I'm quite a fan of horror. I read a lot of horror. I write a lot of horror. It's something I'm into. So when I got started, one of the things I did was I looked up different publishing databases for horror. Well, this turned out to be a horror in large part because many of the databases, unfortunately, aren't always kept up to date. And I found that even though there were a lot of open places that were open for submission, there were a number of publishers that had actually closed. The websites were still up. The publishers had just been closed down for, in some cases, several years. But there's one website, and this is where it gets a little bit... There's one website that is different. That website is called duotrope.com. Not trying to pimp them or anything, but they're the site that I use. Now, unfortunately, they're a pay site. It's only $5 a month, but I personally find that it's worth it. Duotrope is an international database of English language publishers. All different countries, all different publication types. When I started, Duotrope was free. Sadly, because luckily the number of publishers has increased remarkably. When I started, there were only 1,100 publishers in the database in Duotrope because there are really only 1,100 publishing houses in English. That number is now over 4,900. So it's almost 5 times as many publishers as there were just a few years ago. Like I said, now it's a pay site mostly because, well, they spent so much time collecting all these different publishing houses, and there are so many people who use their database on a regular basis that they needed to make it a pay site. They're paying for staff to maintain, to keep the site in proper working order. So unfortunately, it's going to be $5 a month now. Honestly, I think it's worth it because they organize everything into a very simple search engine. So you can just put in horror and search horror, and you can find a list of publishers in horror. And they will give you pay, non-pay, royalties, one-time payments, magazines, publishing houses, anthologies, etc. It's a very effective website. Now, like I said, it's a trade-off because you have the not so reliable sites that are free and the very reliable site that's a pay site. It's really the ball's in your court. It's your call which you prefer to use. I prefer Duotrope. Some people prefer not to use the pay sites like Duotrope. It's up to you. All I'm doing is giving you the information so that you can make an informed decision. Now, the last resource is simply networking. Now, I'm probably going to do a video on this later on because networking is so important nowadays. But what you'll find is that in pretty much every city, every county, every region, particularly every state, especially if you're around colleges and universities, there are writers' groups. all over the country. And this is just simply get-togethers, sometimes once a month, sometimes twice a month, sometimes once every other month, of writers, people who write uh, fiction, creative nonfiction, essays, poetry, and you get together, you discuss writing techniques, writing methodologies. You might find people who have connections. Oh, I've published through this and this website, or oh, I've published through this and this publishing house, and I have an in with the editor. I can talk to them and see if they're looking for the kind of novella that you're working on. That's the kind of conversation you might have. Obviously, if you never join any writers groups, you're never going to have a conversation like that. So again, the last thing is really networking. If you can network, and Facebook is another great way to network because there are so many writers groups on Facebook nowadays, it's absolutely ridiculous. So I think I've covered enough for just basic, this is the resources, or these are the resources that you're going to probably be using. It's pretty extensive, so go out there, get to it. Cheers.